And check this out. We have a honey garlic habanero hot sauce, Lacto Fermented. The only ingredients that are in this hot sauce are these two things. That's it. Fermented habaneros, fermented honey garlic. Combine the two for a kick-ass hot sauce.
Ingredients needed: raw honey, 1 head of garlic, 18 habaneros. For the habaneros, I just give them a quick rinse under cold running water, let them air dry. I highly recommend you wear rubber gloves when handling any kind of pepper hotter than that of a jalapeno. Next, you want to pull the stems off the habaneros, and you want to inspect each pepper. If there's any kind of bruising, you could cut the part off of the pepper and make sure that the rest of it's not rotting. If it's not, then go ahead and keep on moving forward with that. I'm checking every pepper to make sure there are not any kind of bruises or blemishes on them and cutting the peppers in half. As I'm cutting the peppers in half, I'm inspecting each half to make sure they're not rotten or anything like that. You want the placenta and the seeds to be nice and bright white like that. If there are any kind of discoloration, normally I could scrape the placenta and the seeds out of there and the pepper will be fine. But if the pepper's starting to go bad, go ahead and discard it. Once the peppers are cut in half, plop them into a bowl. All the heat from the pepper comes from the placenta itself, not the seeds, but if you want to remove both parts, that is optional. Next, we grab our garlic. We have 1 head of garlic, giving each clove of garlic a gentle smash on the cutting board. Make sure you point your blade downward towards the cutting board, that way you don't accidentally cut yourself if you're using your hand to smash it down. For me, this makes it easier to remove that outer papery layer, and gently smashing the garlic will release the juices in the honey, and it'll help speed up the fermentation process. I like to scrub my cutting board and my knife with a little bit of vinegar after I'm done cutting up habaneros. That will help neutralize the capsaicin that's in the habaneros themselves. You don't want to cross-contaminate other foods that you're going to be cutting up later on with the same knife, same cutting board if it still has capsaicin on it. This also works scrubbing your hands with the sponge soaked in vinegar as well. If you have any capsaicin on your fingers, it'll help neutralize it. It won't completely get rid of it, but it definitely helps. All produce scraps that I accumulate, such as these garlic papers, I chuck in my compost bin. A very, very useful thing to have, and no waste. Now let's move on to the fermentation process itself. Equipment is very, very simple. I have a mason jar, a glass weight, salt, and filtered water, and you also need a digital kitchen scale that reads in grams. Set the scale to read grams, place your mason jar on the scale, and tare it or zero it out, and add a pinch of cumin seeds, which is my favorite when I'm making hot sauces. I tend to use this seed all the time in my sauces. Drop in the habaneros. Probably should be wearing rubber gloves at this point in time too. Fill the jar up with filtered or bottled spring water. I tend to stay away from tap water. Fill the jar up just to the bottom of the neck of the jar with your water. And I like to place in a couple of rosemary sprigs. I love the flavor that rosemary plays off of the habaneros. The habaneros themselves are floral, they're fruity, and they're really, really delicious. Calculate that total weight, which you get 714 grams. Multiply that by 3%, you get 21.42 grams. Now, if your scale doesn't read in decimal points, go ahead and round to the nearest whole number, not a problem there. Place a bowl onto the scale, tare it, add your calculated amount of salt, which is 21 grams. I like doing it this way since if you add too much salt to the bowl, you could fish some of it out. Now back to the jar with the water and the habaneros. I pour the water out of that jar into the bowl with the salt. Give the salt and the water a very vigorous mix to dissolve that salt completely. Now that you have that salty water solution, which is our brine, pour it back into the mason jar with the peppers and the rosemary. Now you want to place a fermentation weight, keeping the peppers submerged underneath the brine. I'm using a glass baby food jar, been using it for years, works perfectly fine. Parchment paper underneath the lid and screw that lid on very, very gently. Carbon dioxide builds up as a product of fermentation. You want these threads to be nice and loose, that way any pressure could be released. Make sure that the peppers are kept underneath that brine level as this ferments. Keep those ingredients submerged. I'm fermenting my peppers for 30 days. I have a spot in my pantry that stays consistent temperature wise. Basically, you just want to let these ferment at room temperature away from direct sunlight. The fermented honey garlic is even easier. I grab a clean mason jar and add the garlic cloves that have been peeled directly to the jar. A cinnamon stick for even more added flavor, and now you want to top the garlic off with your raw honey. I'm going to end up using about half of this container of the honey, which equals about 16 ounces. If your honey is not very pourable, you can place this container in a bowl of warm water for a couple minutes to loosen it up. Give your garlic a stir and mix it thoroughly with the honey. You want to make sure all of these garlic cloves stay coated with the honey at all times. I'm filling the jar up about 3/4 of the way full with the honey. fit your mason jar lid rather snugly onto the jar. These lids are cool because you can check when there's pressure built up. As this ferments the first couple days during the fermentation process, you're gonna need to release the pressure 1, even 2 times a day. I like to turn the mason jar upside down for a few minutes every day to make sure that all these garlic cloves get coated with the honey. You could also spin your jar, coating their garlic cloves with the honey. The honey will loosen up after about 5 days. Now this is gonna ferment for 30 days, the same time frame as the habaneros. Room temperature, 30 days.
I have a pH meter. This is the very first thing that I do before I make hot sauces when I ferment the ingredients.
Things that you ferment, for them to be safe to consume, need to have a pH less than 4.6. My peppers normally sit 3.6 to 3.8. Honey is a little different story. It sits a little higher on the pH scale, about 4.4 to 4.6. Just as long as it's under 4.6, we don't want to run the risk of growing botulism with our ferments. If you want to store the honey garlic for a longer period of time, you could add a splash of apple cider vinegar to it to lower the pH level. Now we are ready to start making the sauce.
First, I'm gonna strain these. Not strain it, but kind of pour out some of that brine. We're gonna save it for when we go to actually make the hot sauce itself. It's what I'm gonna be using to adjust the consistency on it. Got this window right here open. Definitely a necessary thing when you're making hot sauces with habaneros or anything spicier than that of a jalapeno. You definitely don't wanna be burning your throat, kills your sinuses. And if you have little kids running around like I do, then it's not the best.
Grab yourself a blender and pour some of that brine along with all the peppers into the blender.
For this honey, I'm actually not gonna use all of it. I'm gonna use half of a cup's worth of that honey. This honey is awesome. Use it in like a honey Dijon mustard or something like that. Use it in a marinade. I'm actually gonna try dehydrating it, making a seasoned salt out of it. If that works, then I'll make a video on how to do that. Garlic goes in with about a half cup's worth of that honey. Like I said, nothing else is gonna get added to this. I might actually add like a little bit of pepper. Couple turns worth on my mill. It looks like that's a pretty decent amount of liquid. I like to try to see where the ingredients are at and then fill it up with enough liquid to cover them by half. You could always adjust consistency, of course. All right. It's a little on the thick side, I'd say. Yeah, a little pulpy still. And give her a little bit more brine. Just a little splash should do it. This is all personal preference. Make it thick, make it thin, keep it pulpy, don't. I like smoother hot sauces, mixing bowl, fine mesh strainer, pour it in.
I like using a small ladle to gently force the sauce through the fine mesh strainer.
Man, that is a beautiful color. I love that. The consistency looks pretty good. I like thinner hot sauces, obviously that's a personal preference. Oh my God. That honey really hits it up front, and that garlic, that is beautiful. The habaneros themselves are nice and floral, nice and fruity. They're fucking delicious, and then your mouth just gets slaughtered by that spiciness. It is perfect.
Stabbing at any kind of controversy, I will be cooking my lacto fermented hot sauce.
I want to kill the fermentation process because I don't want this to keep fermenting. If it keeps fermenting and I have it sitting in this container, number one, the flavor profile is gonna change and I like where the flavor is at, right? And I don't wanna have little miniature explosions in my pantry or in my refrigerator. If it keeps fermenting, you're gonna build up pressure in the container. When you go to pop the lid off, you could potentially, get a little volcano-like action, hot sauce all over the fucking place. That's no fun. Cook the sauce, doesn't really matter to me. In order to kill any kind of bacteria, that would be lactic acid bacteria, that would be botulism. Bring it up to 185 degrees right there for about 5-10 minutes. Being that this is a habanero hot sauce, as this comes up to a simmer, the fumes are gonna go into the house. Crack a window, you have a fan blowing the fumes out that way. I found that if you put a lid on it, it kind of keeps everything inside underneath that lid, you know what I mean? So you don't really fumigate yourself that way. I kind of like to keep it off until I see that it's starting to simmer. When I want the benefits of lactic acid bacteria in my microbiome to be the happiest of campers, of course, I make things like fermented beets, fermented carrots, fermented corn, sauerkraut, which I did a spicy version of sauerkraut. Check that video out right there. Link for that video will be in the description. And eventually I'm gonna get to doing a purple cabbage sauerkraut, right? That one is super, super amazing. I love that one.
Once your sauce has cooled slightly, pour it into mason jar or hot sauce bottles.
This will not go bad anytime soon. You'll probably consume this far before it even goes bad. It is kick-ass sauce. So I do store it in a mason jar, hot sauce bottles if you have them. parchment paper underneath the lid. And that's that.